All the messaging then on the economy land on the doorstep. Joining us now, Anna Turley, the Labour MP who favours Remain, Stephen Kinnock, a Labour MP who now wants a deal, and Miata Fambula, the Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation. I think we saw a lot of the ideas presented by John McDonnell today from you originally. Before we talk about some of these policy ideas, I just want to bring up the Telegraph's front page tomorrow to ask our MPs whether they agree with this. Corbyn accused of a stitch-up in the Brexit vote, that moment in the hall where the chair thought it was a vote of hands in favour of the unambiguously Remain position, who then got overturned by the General Secretary, Jenny Formby, who said no, it wasn't. And then they asked for a vote, a carded vote, as we call it, which would be done privately, anonymously, and that was denied. So the Telegraph's line is that it was a stitch-up by the master of democracy who loves his members and his delegates. Your sense, Stephen?
I think it would have been helpful to have the carded vote, because that would then just dispel all of the doubts and questions. So it's one of those things where it's better to err on the side of caution and have the vote. I wasn't party to that conversation, so I don't know why that decision was taken. But we wouldn't be having this conversation now if it had been a carded vote. Did
it look odd to you, Anna?
Well, I agree with Stephen. I don't think it was a particularly edifying spectacle, but I'm not sure that the result would have actually changed that much. I think the reality is, that's what members voted for, and it wasn't a great spectacle, but that's where we are, and that's the.
It is odd, though, isn't it? This man who's imbued so much power in his members and the delegates and the people who form Labour from the grassroots up, to then appear to have ignored a lot of their...
Well, yeah, I think there'll be a lot of members, particularly, we are hugely Remain party. We do have an overwhelming number of Remain members. We have a Remain position in Wales and in Scotland. So I think there will be a large number of members who are very disappointed with the position today. But conference is conference. That's the decision was reached. And as I said, I don't think even with a card vote there would have been much of a difference in the outcome.
Yeah, so you don't want anyone to be talking about this stuff. You want them to talk about the 32-hour week. You want to talk about the million new houses, the cap on rents.
Absolutely. Look, we are in the midst of an economic crisis. I think for huge parts of the country, they have been under incredible amounts of pressure. We have families that are struggling to feed their kids, communities that are really, really, really struggling. And actually what we need from all of our political parties, what we need from our politicians is an ambitious agenda about how we address this, how we address the climate emergency on the other side. So Brexit for us is a huge frustration because it is sucking all the political bandwidth away from the big issues that, in the end, people care about.
And can you talk about those issues on the doorstep when there is this ambiguous position on Brexit?
I share the frustration, absolutely. I wish that politics was about the things that it used to be about jobs, about austerity, about the food banks, about the disgraceful rise in the number of homeless people on the streets. And there was so much in John's speech today that I thought was inspirational in many ways, because the British economic model is broken and it has to be fixed. But unfortunately, because we failed to stick to our guns on Brexit, I think we should have stuck to the pledge in the 2017 manifesto that we would respect the result of the referendum but leave with a deal. That would have been a bridge-building position. We could have taken the air out of the Brexit.
Twice. You didn't vote for the Theresa May deal, which now looks like a soft Brexit.
We pushed rightly Theresa May to reach out to Labour and have cross-party talks so that we could co-design a Brexit deal with her. She finally did that, and the result of that, I think, is a really good package that should be brought to Parliament and we should be able to vote on. It includes concessions on customs union, on environmental and consumer standards, a bill on workers' rights. That is a deal that we should vote for, and I think on that basis we can leave the EU and finally get politics back to talking about the issues we want to talk about.
And in 2017 that worked because you had Conservatives very much on the austerity path. Now we've seen Boris Johnson essentially flinging money into every cause that he wants. Austerity is dead. That makes your job on the doorstep a lot harder.
Well, I think the reality is we have to resolve Brexit before we go back out to the people. I also want to be talking about the huge issues that matter to my community, the massive rise in child poverty, the unemployment, the fact I've got a youth unemployment rate that is 2.5 times the national average. These are the things I care about, but we cannot get onto these things until we resolve Brexit, because an area like mine...
Has today just made that harder then for you?
Well, I'm concerned about the deal. My position has always been I want to have a referendum on a final deal before we go to a general election, because we're not going to get the airtime to talk about this stuff. But you can't separate the two things, because actually in an area like mine, Brexit will increase unemployment. Yes, specifically a no-deal Brexit, but even a soft Brexit, any agreement is going to hit the economy of my region. So Brexit really, to me, is all about jobs and livelihoods and child poverty. They're interrelated.
There's a question, Miata, which is whether the public is as radical as you believe Labour wants them to be. Do you think they are where Labour is?
Well, I mean, I think the political common sense is shifting. I think for a lot of people who are seeing the fact that this economy isn't working for them, the fact that we've seen growth, but actually the majority of people aren't benefiting from it, the fact that people are having to work multiple jobs just to make ends meet, I think they're fed up. I think they're frustrated. And so I think there is an appetite for change. You know, the Brexit referendum...
Appetite for change is undeniable, perhaps. Yeah. When you saw Keir Starmer's face... with the question of stripping private schools of assets or of taking assets away, he couldn't answer half of that. He looked deeply uncomfortable from Labour's front bench. Well, that's within the party.
If you poll a lot of the ideas that were in John McDonnell's speech today, so everything from a 4-day working week through to actually employees having a greater stake in the companies in which they work, stronger worker power, actually they poll really well. They're very common sense. And they're not that radical in the grand scale of where we see a lot of social democratic countries in Europe. Like, this is just mainstream common sense economics. And it's an absolute travesty that that's not where our economics is. So I think it's absolutely right that it's on the political agenda. And I think the public out there will like these ideas.
Len McCluskey said we have to put Leave and Remain to one side and just remember we're a socialist party. Now, you're in the position of backing what looks to be, you know, a Canada Plus style deal, much harder, Singaporean style, much harder than the original one Theresa May. Can you reconcile that in your head, Steve?
Well, I think a lot of the future relationship is going to be for negotiation in the transition period. I think we'll have a general election before that starts in earnest, and I hope that a Labour government will negotiate a deal that is based on a strong alignment with the single market and the customs union.
Are you going to sign up to the one that Boris Johnson brings back if he returns with something that Brussels accepts?
Boris Johnson should bring a deal to Parliament that can strike a balance between getting the backstop sorted out, which has never really been a problem with the Labour Party, but having a political declaration on the future relationship which is based on the concessions that were secured by Labour's negotiating team in the cross-party talks. But in order to get the radical Keynesian economic policies that we need through, we have to not have a deeply divisive culture war that would be unleashed by a second referendum.
But I completely disagree with that, because whatever Boris Johnson brings through is not going to be good for workers' rights. It's not going to be good for environmental standards. It's not going to be right for building the kind of economy that we want to see. It wants to create a Singaporean-style, neoliberal, unregulated economy in this country. There's no way I can sign up to that. And everyone is trying to interpret the 2016 referendum as they want to see it. Let's put it back to the people and ask them what kind of country, what kind of vision, what kind of Brexit they want.
Thank you very much. Thanks.